Okay, so this video we're going to go through lumbar Ppivms. We're going to go through flexion, extension, rotation and lateral flexion. What we'll do for the purposes of the video, we'll zoom in just so you can see a little bit better what we're doing, and we'll discuss what we're doing and why we're doing that. We were talking about earlier that obviously you're going to want to relate this into your assessment, so you're going to pick Ppivms based on what you're finding with your other assessment findings, like your flexion extension. So I think me and Glenn were talking about if you had, for example, someone that was really hinging into extension, then you could look at the extension Ppivm in order to see whether you did have one area of hypermobility or an area of hypomobility, that you could confirm through the Ppivms. So now we're going to go through our flexion Ppivm now. So Glenn, how would we do our flexion Ppivm for the lumbar spine?
So we've got Patrick in sideline position. We can use the same bony landmark as we did for the Ppivms. Yeah, so we're going to come off the top of the iliac crest, bring our fingers down, and that should fall us on L4. Yeah, and then below L5. We then can bring the hips up into flexion. Probably the most logical way to start off with is to just use two fingers. Yeah, one in the intervertebral space below, one in the intervertebral space above. As I feel maximal gapping in the lower finger, I'm going to feel a little bit of movement above. The minute I start to feel any movement above, I'm going to move up. And then I'm going to work my way again there. Okay, good.
And then you're feeling for whether there's any increased motion at a segment or decreased motion at a segment compared to the other segments of that lumbar spine.
Exactly. Is one moving excessively? Is one hypomobile and not moving as you would expect? Yeah. So is it stiff or is it loose? I think is the simplest way to think of that. Me personally, I will do it in a similar way, but I like to have a bit of a feel of how the segment is moving generally before I move up. So I'll take it through its range, back out of its range, and then I'll move up. And I personally just get a better inclination of what's going on like that.
And then we were saying earlier, or discussing earlier, about how you'd be relating this one into more of a flexion motion. So if someone was restricted into flexion, you could do this to either confirm or negate your hypothesis. So if your hypothesis was there was some stiffness of the spine, then you'd be wanting to feel that on this one. And if you weren't feeling that, then you can potentially be thinking that flexion restriction might be coming from elsewhere. It might not be the actual spine joints that are causing that issue. It could be more myofascial or other aspects going on there, basically.
Exactly, yeah, it could be something like hamstrings.
Yep.
In this position you're offloading hamstrings to a certain extent, so if it felt different to how you was observing in the active range, give you more information for your assessment.
Yeah, and what we'll also do with this as well is we'll just do a zoom in on the area itself, and just so you can see the handling a little bit better. So the next thing we're going to do is go through our extension Ppivms for the lumbar spine. So Glenn, how would we do this one?
Okay, a couple of ways. You can do it in the same way as we did the flexion, but the way I like to do it is to actually come around the other side. Yeah, so if I walk around here, I'm going to take Patrick's feet, I'm going to block them in my thigh, and then I'm going to use my left hand to stabilise the lower part of his legs as well. I'm going to orientate myself the same way. So I'm coming off the top of the iliac crest, coming down L4-5, and then from here I'm going to bring him back into extension. The difference here is you're waiting to feel the joint close rather than opening. Yeah, so you want to feel a closing down of the lower segment.
And again, similar things to what we were talking about before, in the sense that you are comparing one segment to the next.
Exactly.
And it's all about whether there's excess motion or not enough motion at individual joints, but you're always comparing that to the other joints of the spine.
Again, a good example for extension Ppivm may be if somebody's hinging when you're doing your active range, and you'd want to reproduce that with the Ppivm or get a feeling of that when you're doing the extension Ppivm.
Perfect. What we'll also do with this one is do a quick close-up of that handling as well, just to make it easy for you guys to see what we're doing. Okay, so this video we're going to go through our rotational Ppivms of the lumbar spine. So Glenn, how would we do this one?
So same position, side lying. Again, always orientating yourself the same way. I think it's a nice way to start from the iliac crest down to L4-5. If we take rotation, what I'm going to do here, I'm going to orientate myself down there, L4-5, and I'm going to just bring Patrick into rotation. Now I am below the spinous process, so I'm feeling the inferior segment gapping on the superior segment.
And you're pushing essentially on the kind of greater trochanter essentially to create that rotation?
Exactly, yeah, I'm trying to keep my forearm in line with the shaft of the femur, and then I'm pressing up into rotation here, working my way up. Same principle, I use 2 fingers. When I'm feeling maximal movement on the lower finger and it just starts to move on the superior finger, then I move myself up another level. And again, I like to have a bit of a general feel of each level and then go back and be a little bit more specific.
And again, like we've talked about before, I think it's important to relate what you're finding to that individual, so whether you feel any more movement at one section or any less movement at one segment compared to the other segments, that's what you're really looking for, isn't it, with these sorts of things?
Exactly, and making sure that however you choose to do it, whether you're above the spinous process or below, that you reproduce that same way every time you do it for that person, because you'll be feeling slightly different things.
Yeah, and again, we'll do a quick close-up of the handhold and the positioning on this one as well. So the next thing we're going to do is go through our lateral flexion Ppivms of the lumbar spine. So Glenn, how would we go through those?
Again, same start position, side lying. Couple of different ways that you can do this. I'll show a couple of ways here. Same orientation here off the iliac crest, L4-5. And then I can either cup my hand under the ischium and bring into lateral flexion, like that. But what I prefer to do is to actually use the legs. So I bring the legs out here, and then I'm going to rotate the legs to get the same movement. Same principle as the others. I'm just getting a general feel of each level. And then I'm going to be a little bit more specific. I'm on the bottom side of the spinous process, so I'm feeling gapping again, from the bottom level on the top. If I was above the spinous process, then I would be feeling for closing down. So as we were saying before, it's important to just find a way that suits your handling best and reproduce that every time.
Yeah. And again, you're comparing each segment to each other, and then you get them onto the other side if you wanted to do that on the other side, or you can look again at the handhold and do different handling positions.
You can actually, from this position, look at the other side lateral flexion as well by dropping the other way.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you can get a feeling of the other side in this position. Now, ideally, I would rotate the patient over and do it on the other side, the same as I demonstrated initially. But if they're unable to lie on that side for any reason, pain, irritability, you can assess it in this position as well.
Perfect. And then we'll also get a quick close-up of the handling through this one.